Hari Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Swami Jyotirmayananda Society, our journey to self-realization. Please subscribe our channel for the mystical meanings and to enjoy daily satsang. We are currently exploring the book Yoga Essays for Self-Improvement, authored by Swami Jyotirmayananda Maharaj, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So today we are picking up the topic of the practice of balance of mind. A balanced mind is the prerequisite for the development of spiritual knowledge. When distractions of the mind are stilled, the light of intellect continues to burn steadily. It becomes transformed into the intuitive light which dispels the darkness of ignorance and reveals the self. This intuitive light is also known as pragya, and this is the curtain that has to be removed of illusion so we can see the self. But how, in the face of the diverse conditions of pleasure and pain, gain and loss, hot and cold, etc., is it possible for an aspirant to maintain a balanced mind? How is it possible to attain self realization? It is important to develop a keen insight into yogic psychology. Painful conditions develop as a result of past vicious actions or karmas. When a negative karma or action performed in the past begins to fructify, the mind becomes tinged with rajas or externalization. Then, in spite of one's best efforts, it is difficult to control the feverish agitation of the mind. In the absence of spiritual knowledge, a person becomes identified with that agitated state and believes that a certain negative situation to be the cause of his suffering. He does not have the insight that the self, his reality, is unaffected by the pleasure and pain and is the silent witness of both positive and negative states of mind. So, this is a gradual process. Due to his inability to look at the mind with detachment, the following developments start to occur. There arises raga or attachment to pleasant conditions and dvesha or hatred towards unpleasant conditions. Having encountered a painful development, one begins to torment the mind with various negative thoughts, which in turn attract more negative thoughts from the Akashic ethereal plane. Think of these thoughts in the cloud, just like you pull files from the data drive, much in the same way you start pulling negative thoughts more and more towards yourself by this kind of thinking. The Rajasic externalization state of mind, which formed the basis of the fructification of the painful karma in the first place, now further degenerates into a tamasic or a dull state, leading to unnecessary regrets, sorrows, griefs, and torments. So it started with rajas, but because we perpetuated it, it ended up taking a tamasic form or a destructive form. The distracted mind further exaggerates the operations of a past negative karma. What might have been a gentle slap on the wrist now becomes a violent whiplash because of our resistance and because we overdid it. What might have been a gust of wind now becomes a raging storm. The same process applies to the fructification of a good karma from the past. During the fructification of a good karma, the mind becomes modified into a sattvic or a pure pattern, bringing in harmony and cheerfulness. Due to ignorance, a person develops attachment to this state of mind. He begins to feel a dependence upon the objects of the world because he thinks he acquired happiness from an external source. These forces of attachment and desire bring about a tamasic condition in the mind, which then expresses itself in the form of trishna or spriha, meaning craving. Now, instead of bringing about a satisfied state of mind, the experience of a pleasant development causes increased cravings. You want more and more of it. When there is attachment, there is fear, fear of losing it. Objects are of the nature of being transient and beyond one's control. So, when facing situations wherein one's dearly loved objects are so insecure and where all one's wits and strengths are of no avail in securing them, one develops the degrading sentiment of fear. How am I going to live without the object of pleasure or without the person to whom I am so attached? And that is why many people struggle when their partner passes away, if they were too dependent on him, thinking they are not capable to move on in life. So, in truth, happiness does not proceed from any object or person. This belongs, this being so, this being the case, it is impossible to find fulfillment through a life dependent on objects and people. Happiness proceeds from the self, and it is by discovering the bliss of the self through intuitive realization that a person becomes fully satiated and satisfied. It is a person's inner urge to discover the love of the self that refracts from the form of his illusory love for the objects and people of the world. So, the real joy and happiness is within, and that light shining comes in, shows up in the things and the objects, and we think that's the source. The famous Upanishadic statement makes this point very clear. Yo vai bhuma tat sukham nalpe sukham asti. In that which is infinite alone lies bliss. There is no bliss or happiness in the finite objects of the world. Another Upanishadic statement, Atmanastu kamaye sarvam priyam bhavati. All becomes dear for the sake of the self, emphasizes the fact that all loving states of mind arising out of raga are faulty and defective. In the presence of these illusions, it is impossible for a person to develop a balanced mind. However, if an aspirant were to turn his head mind to God and develop devotion to Him, his loving sentiments would be led to their sublime fulfillment. Love of God, surrender to God, and performing actions in the spirit of dedication to God are all powerful aids in removing the causes that bring distraction to the mind. When the need for love is deeply fulfilled, the mind will not run after the objects of the world. It becomes Atmatript or self contented. With an increased awareness of the divine presence within, an aspirant does not allow himself to be agitated during the changing conditions of pleasure and pain. It is enough just to bear a painful condition caused by previous karmas. There is no need to exaggerate the suffering, and still more importantly, there is no need to sow the seeds of future sufferings due to an artless confrontation of the present situation. So be realistic, measure it, don't exaggerate or overthink it. The vision of divine love enables one to keep his mind balanced in pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and censure. A devotee does not have to worry about guarding his possessions against the various causes that could destroy them, nor about the necessities that he must acquire in the future. Though he continues his self effort towards the practical values of life, he does not allow his mind to worry and grieve over things that are well designed and sustained by the cosmic will of God. Freed from constant concern about the objects of the world, unagitated during adverse conditions, elated during prosperous conditions, circumstances, balanced in gain and loss, maintaining a spirit of increasing surrender to God, a yogi allows the light of his reason to burn steadily, even in the midst of the winds of worldly developments. So they handle both prosperity and adversity with equanimity and grace. Instead of generating impressions of distraction and pain, he continues to generate positive impressions of joyousness, harmony, divine love, and inward expansion. These impressions destroy the negative impressions in his unconscious and subconscious and thus bring about a complete transformation in his personality. Aided by a steady intellect, a yogi ascends the ladder of meditation and samadhi. He attains union with the divine self. Endowed with intuitional knowledge, he discovers his identity with the self and beholds the world as an expression of his own self. What could he desire? What should he be afraid of? He has nothing to lose, nothing to gain. Though operating through his limited personality and abiding by his fructification of the past karmas, a sage remains a detached witness to the revolving wheel of his mind. He does not allow his mind to generate into tamasic illusions and cravings. An aspirant must keep this ideal in view and practice balance of mind by gaining deep insight into the mystery of life. So, with this, we conclude our satsang for today. Tomorrow, we will be picking up the topic of bliss and how to experience it. How wonderful! Hari Om Tat Sat.